Subscribe and like this video, more interesting revenge stories of elderly people coming soon. I used to be seen. Not just noticed, seen. A presence that filled rooms, interrupted silence, turned heads. But now, I walk through crowds like a ghost that forgot how to vanish. Nobody turns. Nobody looks. I'm 74. I live in a house that still remembers who I was, even if no one else does. It creaks with age, but stands proud. Like me. The garden is overgrown, but not wild. The fence chipped, but not broken. Everything here is slightly bruised, but holding on. Like me. Every morning, I drink my tea, black, no sugar, same porcelain cup with a crack near the rim. The TV plays in the background, muted. The silence helps me think. Sometimes I watch the news. Not for the content. Just to feel the rhythm of a world I no longer touch. I wear a heavy wool blanket over my legs, though I'm rarely cold. Old habits die last. My children? Busy. Important. At least that's what they say when they answer, which is not often. Once a month, my daughter sends flowers. A gesture wrapped in obligation. My son. He speaks to me like I'm a voicemail he forgot to delete. The grandkids, when they visit, which is rarer than rain in August, it's like they're at a zoo. They stare through me, half polite, half bored. They call me Grandpa, like it's a password to leave the room faster. The youngest asked once if I was still working. When I said no, he looked relieved, not out of concern, but because he didn't have to ask any more questions. I go to the store alone. No one offers help. No one waits. Once, I dropped a can. It rolled under the shelf. A man beside me watched. Then walked away. Like I didn't exist. At the clinic, the nurse spoke about me as if I weren't there. He's forgetful, she whispered. I wasn't. I heard every word. Sometimes I wonder if I died and no one told me. But I'm not dead. Not yet. Not even close. There's something in me, still alive. A flicker, faint but hot. Some call it pride. Some call it ego. I call it memory. I remember who I was. And I remember what they've done. Or rather, what they haven't done. I sit in this quiet, day after day, like an old beast chained too long. But lately, I've started hearing things again. Not with my ears. With instinct. Like an old hunter listening to the wind. I've started writing again. Not stories. Names. Places. Events. Offenses. A ledger. Not of debts owed, but of respect withdrawn. You see, I've forgiven much in my life. But lately, I find the taste of forgiveness turning sour in my mouth. They think I'm fading. That I've lost my grip. My strength. My will. They think time hollowed me out. But they're wrong. Time doesn't erode stone. It hides what lies beneath. And in me, something is waking. Not anger. Not bitterness. Something colder. Sharper. Something with teeth. They'll learn, eventually. That just because a man grows old, doesn't mean he grows weak. Some shadows only grow darker with age. And mine is just beginning to stretch. They used to call me Ulysses the Iron Hand. Not because I was cruel. But because I never trembled. Back then, when my name was spoken, it meant something. Doors opened. People listened. And those who didn't, eventually wished they had. Not because I yelled. I didn't need to. My silence said more than a roomful of speeches. I walked into boardrooms like a general entering a war he already won. Because I always played 10 moves ahead. I remember the 90s. Chaos. Bankruptcies. Betrayals. The country was bleeding, families were collapsing. But not mine. I shielded them. I sold everything to pay for my children's education. I slept 3 hours a night to rebuild a business torn apart by cowards I once called partners. And when the same men who tried to bury me came crawling back, I let them. Then I made sure they never forgot who kept them from drowning. But they did forget. Everyone does. Eventually. I remember my wife's eyes the day we signed the mortgage for the 3rd time just to send our son to Harvard. She didn't question. She knew what I was made of. She believed in me. God, I miss her. She died thinking we had built something permanent. A legacy. But legacies are brittle things when left in the wrong hands. My empire is now someone else's asset file. My office, now a storage unit. My portrait, taken down. Replaced by a logo I don't recognize. People say, don't live in the past. But what if the past was the only place you mattered? I remember when my phone never stopped ringing. Now it dies fully charged. I saved lives. Not metaphorically. Literally. Paid hospital bills for people I barely knew. Covered someone else's payroll to stop them from losing everything. Put enemies in jobs because I didn't believe in revenge. Back then, I thought that was strength. But now? I wonder if I was just a fool in a better suit. The people I lifted, never looked down to see who held them up. My children live in glass towers I paid for, but all they see when they look at me is a man they've outgrown. Sometimes I sit in the dark and ask myself, where did it all go? The fire. The noise. The respect. But respect doesn't vanish. It's stolen. Quietly. Over time. One unanswered call at a time. One forgotten favor. One turned back. And I've let it happen. I let them believe I had nothing left. That I was a relic. A cracked statue. But the truth? I am not what I was. I'm what comes after. After the applause fades. After the crowd leaves. After the masks fall. There's a reason they used to fear me. Not because of what I did. But because of what I could do. What I chose not to. And I've made my last kind choice. They think the past is gone. But I've kept it. All of it. In notebooks. Documents. Secrets. I never forgot how to play. I just stepped off the board. But now I feel the pieces moving again. The weight of strategy returning to my hands. They don't know it yet. But the game has already started. Pain doesn't come like a storm. Not at this age. It comes like a leaky faucet. Drip, by drip, by drip. Until one day, you realize your soul is flooded. It was Tuesday. Or Thursday. I forget, not because I'm old, but because every day now looks the same. I called my son. 3 times. No answer. 4th time, voicemail. His voice, cheerful, automated, "Hey, this is Mark. I'm not available right now, leave a message." I didn't. I hung up. Because what could I possibly say that he'd hear? An hour later, I tried again. This time, he answered. "Dad, I'm in a meeting," he hissed, like I was a telemarketer. "You can't just keep calling. Everything okay?" I wanted to say, "No. Nothing is okay. I need help." But the word stuck. Instead, I said, "No rush. Just checking in." He hung up with a tight, clipped, "Okay, I'll call you later." He didn't. Later that week, I asked my grandson to help me lift a box in the garage. He laughed. Not cruelly. Not loudly. But the kind of laugh that cuts deep. The kind that says, "You're not someone who gets helped. You're someone we joke about at dinner. He pulled out his phone and said, "Come on, Grandpa, you can still bench press, right?" He didn't help. The box stayed where it was. The worst wasn't the laugh. It was the way he walked away, like I was done. Like the end of a scene. Like I was the background. A week later, at the clinic, the young doctor didn't speak to me. He spoke to the nurse, about me. He's not fully there anymore, I think. Just do the blood pressure and keep him on his meds. I was sitting right in front of him. Eyes open. Back straight. When I tried to interrupt, he patted my shoulder. Not kindly. But the way you touch a dog you're about to send to the shelter. I clenched my fists. Not out of rage. Out of restraint. On the way home, a plastic bag tore open near the bus stop. A stranger bumped into me. Didn't stop. The oranges rolled into the gutter. I bent down slowly. My knees burned. My hands shook. A teenager passed by, glanced at me, and said to his friend, "Why are they even out alone? It's kinda sad." They kept walking. I sat on the curb. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself feel it. Not anger. Not sadness. Invisibility. It was worse than death. Because death ends things. This is erasure. A slow deletion of the self. But as I sat there, staring at the bruised orange rolling in the street, something inside me clicked. Not loudly. Just a click, like a loaded chamber finally locking in place. I went home. Locked the door. And opened the drawer. My notebook was still there. Names. Dates. Times. Not revenge lists. Records of disrespect. I've always believed that the world is held together by the small things, the unseen acts of grace and gratitude. But if that's true, then it can also be undone by small things. 1,000 little humiliations. Quiet, forgotten by the world, but never by me. They think I'm shrinking. But really, I'm collecting. Pain is fuel. And my tank is full. The dam is starting to crack. They won't see it coming. Because no one ever looks closely at a man they think is harmless. But I'm not harmless. Not anymore. It happened on a cold, gray afternoon, the kind that feels like the world forgot to wake up. I was carrying 2 grocery bags. Light ones. I choose light things now, just to avoid the stare of pity from strangers. But even light bags tear. I heard the rip before I felt the weight shift. One moment I was upright. The next, I was on the concrete, on my knees, the bags exploded around me, cans rolling, bread flattened, apples scattered like marbles. A group of teenagers nearby laughed. Loud. Careless. Not at something funny, but at me. Someone said, "Man, look at him, this is just sad." Someone else added, "He shouldn't be out here alone." They didn't offer help. No one did. People walked around me like I was a fallen signpost on the sidewalk. Something inconvenient, not tragic. As I struggled to gather the crushed groceries, I heard it, the word that didn't sting, but pierced clean through. Useless. Maybe they meant the moment. Maybe they meant me. But my mind didn't care about context. Something inside me, something old, ancient, disciplined, finally opened its eyes. Not rage. Rage is messy, loud, stupid. This was different. This was clarity. I stood up slowly. Not shaky, deliberate. I felt the weight of my spine align, the way it used to when I entered a boardroom to end a war before it began. My breath, steady. Too steady. My pulse, calm. Too calm. It was as if I'd been asleep for years, and suddenly the room caught fire, forcing me awake. I didn't look at the laughing kids. They weren't the cause. They were merely the final straw. I looked at my hands. Old hands. Veins like rivers. Skin like worn paper. But inside them, memory. Strength. Skill. As I walked home, the world around me looked different. Sharper. Colder. Like every face had a label now: ally, opportunist, liar, parasite, forgot. People don't understand, the most dangerous man in the world is not the one who shouts. It's the one who whispers to himself, enough. When I entered my house, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like an accomplice. A partner. I went straight to the bedroom. Opened the closet. Moved aside the clothes no one sees me wear. Behind them was the safe. The metal groaned when I twisted the old dial. Inside. A phone. Old, but not obsolete. A black notebook. Leather cover, edges frayed. A folder of documents that could ignite small wars if placed in the right hands. Flash drives. Business cards of people who owed me favors they prayed I had forgotten. I didn't. I sat at the table and spread everything out. Paper by paper. File by file. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hesitating. I was planning. People think monsters roar. But the real ones? The real ones move quietly, precisely, piece by piece. I dialed the first number. Didn't speak when they answered. Just breathed. Slow. Controlled. The voice on the other end froze. I could hear old fear waking up inside him. Good. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence on the first page in a hand that had not forgotten what certainty feels like. I am done being harmless. Then, like a conductor lifting his baton for a symphony only he knows the notes to, I whispered, to myself, to the walls, to the ghosts of who I was. The game begins again. No one heard it. But soon. They all would feel it. There is a very specific calm that settles over you when you stop hoping people will change. It's not peace, peace is warm, gentle, forgiving. No, what I felt was colder. Cleaner. Like the clarity of a freshly sharpened blade. For the first time in years, I woke up before dawn not because I couldn't sleep, but because I wanted to. I brewed tea. No sugar. No sound. Calm, methodical. I opened my notebook, the same notebook filled with years of quiet disappointments, and I started writing something new. Not memories. Not grievances. Strategy. People think revenge is an explosion. But no. Revenge is architecture. Precision. Patience. Quiet engineering in the dark. I turned on the old phone from the safe. A relic. But filled with numbers that once trembled at my call. Numbers of men who owed me. Numbers of men who thought they had escaped their debts because I had grown too old to matter. I started with the ones who still respected me. Or feared me. Fear was enough. Some calls were simple. A paused breath. A familiar silence. And suddenly, compliance. You can't fake old authority. It never leaves your voice. I didn't need to threaten. They remembered who I was. And what I had done for them. Within a week, threads began to pull loose. My son's company, the one he built on arrogance and borrowed prestige, received an anonymous inquiry into his financial ethics. Not a scandal. Not yet. Just a seed of doubt planted in the right soil. You would be amazed how quickly reputations rot when watered with silence. My grandson, the one who laughed, lost his sponsorship for a sports contract. Not because I wanted to ruin his life. But because he needed to feel something real. Something he had never felt before. Consequences. All it took was one quiet email sent to the board, exposing how he mocked elderly residents during his internship at the retirement center. There was video. There is always video. The world records everything now, every cruelty, every smirk. He wasn't fired. But the contract evaporated. And suddenly, arrogance turned into fear. The best part? No one suspected me. Why would they? I was the old man who could barely carry groceries. Rumors began circulating in my family. Someone is targeting us. Something is happening. Who? Why? They called me more often. First out of panic. Then desperation. I let the phone ring. 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 12 missed calls from my daughter. 9 from my son. 6 texts from my grandson. I sat in my armchair, blanket on my legs, tea cooling on the table, watching the notifications pile up like autumn leaves. Silence was my blade. Stillness, my disguise. No one sees the hand in the shadows until it closes around their throat. But I wasn't choking them. I was showing them what they had become. Cowards. Users. Children who abandoned the man who built their foundation. I never touched them. Never threatened them. Never raised my voice. All I did was give them the one thing they had denied me for years. Attention. Unwanted, undeniable attention. And through it all, I felt, not joy. Not pride. But control. A return of something I thought I had lost forever. Myself. I didn't want their suffering. I wanted their awakening. Because nothing teaches sharper than the truth reflected back at you, brutally, without distortion. I stayed invisible. I stayed quiet. And from the shadows, I watched the dominoes fall. Not to destroy them. But to make them finally look, really look, at the man they had tried so hard not to see. There comes a moment, quiet, almost weightless, when a man realizes he has won. Not because he conquered someone. Not because he destroyed anything. But because the world finally stops pretending he is invisible. It happened one evening, just as the sun slipped behind the rooftops, staining the sky in old gold. I was sitting in my usual chair, the same frayed blanket across my legs, sipping tea that had long since gone cold. And then, the doorbell rang. Once. Then twice. Then a rapid, nervous third time. When I opened the door, they were all there. My son. My daughter. My grandchildren. Standing on my doorstep like a congregation at the foot of a silent altar. Their faces were pale. Eyes wide. Not with guilt, not yet, but with the raw confusion of people who no longer trust their own world. "Dad, can we come in?" my son asked. His voice was smaller than I remembered. I didn't answer. I simply turned and walked back to my chair. If they wanted inside, they would follow. And they did. They stood in my living room in uncomfortable silence, like children waiting for punishment they couldn't define. My grandson avoided my gaze. My granddaughter stared at the floor. My daughter clutched her handbag like a life vest. Finally, my son spoke again. "There's been a lot happening. To us. We don't know who's behind it. We feel like someone is, watching." He waited for me to react. I didn't. He continued, voice cracking. "We came because we realized we haven't been here. Not really. We've been distant. And maybe that made us vulnerable. Maybe we forgot what matters." They all looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time in years, I wasn't a background figure. Not an aging inconvenience. Not an echo of responsibility. I was the center. Not because I asked to be. But because they finally remembered who I was. I let the silence stretch, long, heavy, deliberate. Silence has always been my sharpest tool. My grandson, the proud one, the laughing one, finally raised his eyes to mine. And what I saw there wasn't fear. It was understanding. Late. But real. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, he swallowed hard and simply whispered. "Grandpa." Just that. Not mocking. Not impatient. Just a word returning to its original meaning. I leaned forward. Slowly. My joints protested, but my posture held steady, as if age itself stepped back to make room for something older and stronger than time. I looked at each of them. One by one. And they lowered their eyes like students before a stern but just teacher. I didn't need to confess. I didn't need to explain. And I certainly didn't need to forgive. Forgiveness is for the weak-hearted. This wasn't forgiveness. This was equilibrium. Balance restored. Finally, I reached for my notebook, slowly, purposefully, and placed it on the table in front of me. Its leather cover was worn, corners softened by years of quiet anger. They all stared at it. Even without opening it, they knew what it was. Not the contents, but the weight. The intention. My daughter whispered. "Dad, we're here now. We want to be here." I didn't smile. But something inside me, something hard and ancient, loosened. Just slightly. I opened the notebook to the last page. Tore out a blank sheet. And with deliberate strokes, I wrote the final entry. Aging is not the end. It is the moment when all masks fall. And the world finally learns who a man truly is. I closed the book. Not with finality. But with truth. I wasn't cruel. Cruelty is desperation. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't forgiving. Forgiveness is surrender. I wasn't surrendering. I was, at last, seen. And for a man like me, that was the only justice that ever mattered.